June 17, 1462. Somewhere in the darkness of Wallachia, a small force of horsemen slips past Ottoman sentries and rides straight into the camp of the largest army in the region, an army personally led by Sultan Mehmed II, the man who had conquered Constantinople just 9 years earlier. Their target, the Sultan's own tent. The man leading that raid was Vlad III, voivode of Wallachia, a ruler history would come to know by a much darker name, Vlad the Impaler. Here is the detail that still unsettles historians today. When Mehmed's army finally advanced deep into Wallachian territory after that attack, they found a road line for over a mile with impaled corpses, thousands of bodies left as a deliberate, calculated act of psychological warfare. Contemporary chroniclers describe Ottoman soldiers, veterans of brutal campaigns across 3 continents, recoiling at the sight. Before we go further, everything in this video is drawn from documented history, the account of the Byzantine historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles, the Hungarian court historian Antonio Bonfini, and Ottoman chronicle sources, cross-checked by modern historians of Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire. Where specific numbers are disputed between sources, we will say so directly, and where later legend crept into the story, we will mark it clearly. This is the Night Attack of 1462. Stay with us. By the early 1460s, Wallachia sat in one of the most dangerous positions in Europe, a small principality wedged between the expanding Ottoman Empire to the south and the Kingdom of Hungary to the north, expected to pay tribute and submit to whichever larger power pressed hardest. Vlad III had taken the Wallachian throne with Ottoman backing in 1456, but he had no intention of remaining a quiet vassal. Vlad stopped paying the annual tribute owed to the Ottoman Sultan and began executing Ottoman officials and envoys sent to enforce Ottoman demands. Multiple contemporary sources describe Vlad ordering the deaths of Ottoman emissaries after a dispute over court etiquette, reportedly after they refused, for religious reasons, to remove their turbans in his presence, and he had the turbans nailed to their heads instead. This story appears in period sources close to the events, though, as with many details from this era, some exact specifics may carry embellishment from retelling. We present it here as documented in near-contemporary chronicles, with that caveat noted. Mehmed II, fresh off conquering Constantinople in 1453 and now one of the most powerful rulers in the world, could not tolerate open defiance from a small vassal state on his northern frontier. In the spring of 1462, he personally led a major military campaign into Wallachia to remove Vlad and replace him with a more cooperative ruler. The size of Mehmed's invasion force is genuinely disputed among historians. Some contemporary and near-contemporary sources claim figures as high as 150,000 to 250,000 men. Modern historians treat these numbers with real skepticism, common for medieval and early modern chronicles prone to exaggeration, and generally estimate the actual Ottoman force at somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000 soldiers, still an enormous army for the period, and still vastly larger than anything Wallachia could field in response. Vlad's own forces are estimated by modern historians at somewhere around 20,000 to 30,000 men, a fraction of the Ottoman army's size, with no realistic chance of winning a direct, open battle. So Vlad didn't fight one. As Mehmed's army advanced along the Danube and into Wallachian territory in the spring of 1462, Vlad adopted a scorched earth strategy. Villages were burned, wells were poisoned or destroyed, crops and livestock removed or destroyed, and the population evacuated ahead of the Ottoman advance, deliberately denying Mehmed's massive army the food, water, and shelter it needed to sustain itself deep in hostile territory. Vlad's forces also harassed the Ottoman column continuously as it advanced, using smaller raiding parties, ambushes, and the region's forests and terrain to inflict steady losses without ever risking a full-pitched battle. Then, on the night of June 16 to 17, 1462, Vlad launched the attack that would define his legend, a direct night raid on the main Ottoman camp itself. According to Chalkokondyles' account, Vlad led a force, described in some sources as guided partly by intelligence about the camp's layout, in a nighttime assault intended to strike directly at Mehmed's own tent and, if possible, kill the Sultan personally. The raid caused chaos and significant Ottoman casualties in the confusion of a nighttime attack inside their own camp. But it failed in its ultimate goal. Mehmed survived, either because his tent was too well guarded, or because, as some accounts suggest, the attackers struck the wrong section of the camp in the darkness and confusion of a night assault deep inside enemy territory. Even without killing the Sultan, the raid achieved something significant on its own. It demonstrated that Wallachian forces could penetrate one of the most heavily guarded camps of the era's most powerful army, at night, deep inside its own lines, a serious blow to Ottoman morale and to any assumption of easy total security. As Mehmed's army continued its advance toward Vlad's capital at Târgoviște in the days that followed, it encountered the detail that would ultimately define this campaign in historical memory. According to Chalca condyles and other near-contemporary accounts, Ottoman forces came upon a stretch of road, reportedly extending for roughly a mile, lined with thousands of impaled bodies, a mix, sources suggest, of Ottoman prisoners and others executed by Vlad's forces during the campaign. Some sources cite figures as high as 20,000 impaled corpses. Modern historians generally treat that specific number as likely inflated by chroniclers of the period, while agreeing that a large-scale, deliberate mass impalement display did take place. Contemporary and near-contemporary sources describe this scene as having a profound psychological effect on Mehmed's army, battle-hardened soldiers reportedly shaken by the scale and deliberate horror of the display. Whether this single event alone decided the campaign's outcome, or simply reinforced a decision Mehmed was already leaning toward given the mounting costs of the scorched earth campaign, is debated among historians. What isn't debated is that the display happened, and that it became the defining image of this entire conflict. Facing a devastated countryside, mounting losses, disease, and an increasingly costly campaign far from his supply lines, Mehmed made his decision. Rather than continue pursuing Vlad directly, he turned to a different solution, installing Vlad's own younger brother Radu, known to history as Radu the Handsome, or Radu cel Frumos, who had been raised at the Ottoman court and was considered far more cooperative, as a rival claimant to the Wallachian throne. Mehmed withdrew the bulk of his main army from Wallachia, leaving Radu with Ottoman support to contest the throne against his own brother. Over the following months, Wallachian nobles, exhausted by years of Vlad's brutal rule and facing continued Ottoman pressure, increasingly shifted their support to Radu. By late 1462, Vlad had lost control of Wallachia entirely. Here is where the story takes its sharpest, least expected turn. Vlad did not flee to the Ottomans, his original enemy. He fled north, seeking help from a fellow Christian monarch, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, whose support Vlad believed he could count on to reclaim his throne. Instead, Matthias Corvinus had Vlad arrested and imprisoned. The most commonly cited justification, discussed by multiple historians, involved letters, allegedly forged, and their authenticity disputed by modern scholars, supposedly written by Vlad offering to switch sides and ally with the Ottomans against Hungary. Whether Corvinus genuinely believed this accusation, or used it as a convenient pretext to avoid the political and financial cost of a difficult military campaign to restore Vlad to his throne, remains a matter of historical debate. What is documented is the outcome. Vlad spent roughly a decade as Matthias Corvinus's prisoner, held for years by the very Christian ally he had turned to for protection. Vlad was eventually released and briefly restored to the Wallachian throne in 1476, with renewed Hungarian and Moldavian support. His second reign lasted only a few months. He was killed in battle in either late 1476 or early 1477, fighting against Ottoman-backed forces contesting his rule. Accounts differ on the precise circumstances of his death. Several sources report that his head was subsequently sent to Constantinople and displayed to Mehmed II, as confirmation that the ruler who had once raided his camp and lined a road with impaled bodies was finally, permanently dead. So here is the real irony sitting underneath this story. Vlad's night attack and his brutal scorched earth campaign genuinely stalled and helped turn back one of the largest Ottoman invasion forces of the era, a real documented military and psychological achievement against the empire that had just conquered Constantinople. But the empire he defied was not what ultimately destroyed him. It was a fellow Christian king, an ally he trusted, who imprisoned him for the better part of a decade at the moment he most needed support. And one more detail worth noting clearly, since it separates history from later fiction, the Dracula of vampire legend, the version most people picture today, comes from Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, written over 4 centuries after Vlad's death, and has no historical basis in Vlad's actual life or death. The historical Vlad III was a brutal, calculating ruler who genuinely terrified one of history's most powerful militaries using fear as a weapon, but he was never a vampire, and Stoker's novel borrowed only the name and a vague Transylvanian association, not any documented fact about the man himself. That's the real lesson history leaves behind here. Vlad III made himself so terrifying that he stopped an empire's army in its tracks without ever winning a single major battle against it. And then he was undone not by that empire, but by the ordinary, all-too-human politics of an ally who decided he was more useful in a prison cell than on a throne. This has been the story of Vlad the Impaler and the Night Attack of 1462.